Mark Wigley es un profesor de arquitectura. I think I'm going to do it in English, so yeah, just for reference. Although I think Mark secretly speaks Spanish very well, at least understands. But yeah, okay, we are going to rearrange. Mark is a professor of architecture and Dean Emeritus at Columbia University. I'm sure you all know his work because he's one of the persons who have been changing the discourse of architecture for decades. So when there has been a transformation in how architecture is understood, there has been Mark. He always changes the field of operations, as he has done right now. He has many books and works, and I think it's incredible to see how thinking through Derrida or Mata Clark or Buckminster and Fuller, but also through bacteria and tubes and pipes, has changed the way in which we understand architecture. And I think today we are going to hear a little bit about more of those agents and spaces that generally we don't think when we think about architecture, but through the eyes of Mark, those are actually architecture. So with no more delay, please welcome Mark Wigley. Thank you, Mark.
Now? Okay. We don't have time for a lecture, of course. So maybe just a few minutes I show you some pictures, and then you can eat. And maybe I would like you to think about eating, actually. I mean, I'm sure the translation will be hilarious, so I recommend that you don't listen to me and you only read the artificial intelligence. But I'm speaking to you. Normally you would think that I speak from my head. I have an idea, then I come through the mouth and into the microphone. But I would like you to consider the possibility that it is my intestins that are talking to you, right? They are more or less here, like this. But also you. You are this. You have each of you, on average, 8 meters of intestine. It's not that you have 8 meters of intestine. The intestine is the possibility for you. Now, with the way we make ourselves is we take the outside and we digest it, right? Breathing, by the way, it's a very good idea. Breathing, no? You breathe in and you keep from the air what you need and you remove what you don't. With the food, you take what you need and you throw away the rest. You make yourself from the outside. The human body is made of the outside, right? The inside of the body is actually the outside, because the inside is where is the outside coming into you, waiting for you to turn it into the inside, right? So the first point of view is we are not, the body is not like this, the body is like on the inside. It's this kind of twisted tube. We are therefore not in the world exactly. We are a kind of folding of the world, right? You make a human body by folding the world into a shape. Our body is kind of clustered around this tube. By the way, we do not like to talk about this. Even in Barcelona, you should not have a lecture about this. An enormous part of culture is designed so that we do not talk about anything that happens between the mouth and the anus. We don't want to know the noises, the smells, the liquids, the sounds, nothing. We want to know nothing about this extremely embarrassing psychosexual world. If you look at culture, for example, and say, I want to remove from culture everything that is not to do with hiding what's happening in the intestines, you lose about 99%, right? It could be that culture, high culture, art, means I am not in the world of shit, I'm in the world of ideas. Right? And ideas are up here, and shit is something unmentionable, right? The only room in a house that has a key in the lock is always the toilet. This is the most embarrassing room of the house. This is the room where you connect your intestines to the intestines of the house. And this must happen absolutely in secret. And also when you leave the toilet, you must pretend that nothing happened. Right? You have to leave with a kind of face that says there was nothing. Anything on your face that suggests that something happened, and it's immediately an embarrassment. So just thinking, I'm 1/8 meter of intestine talking to you very, very quickly before we eat. So the colon, it's completely inhabited by bacteria. The bacteria are directly connected to your brain. The bacteria are organizing not just the immune system of your body, but your thinking and your emotions. The so-called gut to brain axis is absolutely direct. So not only is the intestine the possibility of you as an organism, it's the possibility of ideas. Right? It is the beginning of ideas, the beginning of thinking, and ideas are organized by bacteria. This is us, this is you. But this bacteria, which is in your gut, there are at least 4,000 different bacteria, many of which are millions of years old, and the human has only maybe 200,000 years. So the inside of us, is an outside with which we make an inside. But this outside is colonized by bacteria that are using us just for 200,000 years to move around. They don't really need us, we need them. So not only are you an intestine, a bacterial system, those bacteria, there are more bacteria cells than there are human cells. So you are in the minority. You, if you think of yourself as a human, you are a kind of cluster, a kind of a lump around your intestine. This is what it looks like when you look inside. This is what you're going to look like very soon when you eat. This is you. We will do this all night if you have such great technology. It just doesn't work. I need just to move when I push the button. Okay. I think it's okay. We could stop, no? Okay, we just do another 5 minutes, okay? How do you make a human? Okay, you take a flat disc and you fold it this way and you fold it this way. This is what happens to the fetus in the 3 weeks old. When you fold this way and this way, you get this. The human begins as an intestine, as a tube. You see it here. Everything else of the human develops more slowly and it comes around. It's not like Le Corbusier says. This is Le Corbusier on the left. It's not that the inside is here and the outside is there. It's in the wrinkles, right? The middle of that tube, the middle of the tube of the thesis becomes this. This is the entrance to the human, the wrinkles of the inner intestine. The intestine doesn't even fit inside the fetus. So at a certain point, it leaves the fetus. You see it leaving. And it starts to turn, it starts to twist. And it twists and it twists and it twists. And while it's twisting, the rest of the fetus is getting bigger. And after 8 weeks, it will go back inside. So it starts to twist, twists and twists, more and more. Then it becomes this, you, right? So the process of making the human is the process of building a human around this kind of a tube. So when you have a shit, you connect your tube to the tube of the house. No, it's really impossible. The best thing is that you don't touch it, I think. Huh? So your toilet, your shit goes into the house, goes into the world. This is London. This is the map of London sewers, which is as complex as the city that you see. It's the secret city of London. When you sit on the toilet, you are extending your intestine out across the landscape. You are connecting your intestine to everybody else's intestine. It's a very social thing to sit on a toilet. When you sit on the toilet, the inside of the toilet, if you touch it with your finger, that surface also is the same as the surface which is in the next toilet, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. All of these intestines, these artificial intestines that you connect yourself to, is one big interior. It's the biggest interior that we have produced, enormous, right? The house you are sitting in is part of that interior, because every surface of the house finally goes into the toilet. When you clean the house, you wash everything and into the pipes. So the house is just an extension of this vast network of intestines, which is an extension of your intestines, which are connected. When you sit on the toilet, you connect your intestine to everybody else's intestines. To live in a city is to connect your intestines to everybody else's. You know, right? You know that. I'm scared to push the button. I have good reason to be scared. Okay. Okay, it's the first house, 10,000 years ago. A house would be something disconnected from the ground, more or less orthogonal, more or less sealed, right? When we made the first house, it's the moment of the domestication with other humans, with animals, and with plants. This was a moment of expanding the gut, the human gut. The beginning of architecture is the beginning of the expansion of the gut. Architecture is gut expansion, right? The technology is plaster, lime plaster, which is the first artificial material. Requires an enormous amount of energy to burn the stone, to make the lime, to make the plaster, to make a perfectly smooth surface. This is the first 10,000-year-old, the beginning of architecture, which is the beginning of this lime surface. Okay. So architecture is made of an artificial material. It's made of stone. It's made of stone that has been heated incredibly to produce this material, plaster, which enables you to expand your intestine. And in expand your intestine, you share bacteria, and the bacteria share you with different species. And as a result of this sharing of our intestine, our brain, since our brain is part of the intestine, becomes enormously powerful. The human species becomes super intelligent by connecting itself to all the bacteria of all these other species, which we now have found out ways to kill. Right? So this is the kind of, let's say, history of the human race. Quickly to the planet. Maybe you don't know, this is the inside of the planet. I showed you the inside of the human body. Here's the inside of the planet. It's a combination of liquid on the outside, then semi-liquid, and so on. The main material, the most common material of this planet that you are in is silica. Right? Silica is 95% of the outer layer and is mainly stone. So basically, and stone can be in a liquid form or a solid form. So we sit here with our intestins now wrapped in our new kind of stone, which causes architecture on a kind of a stone planet. And it is that very same silica, the most pure silica is found in only 3 places in the earth. This is one place it's coming from. In order to make it's becoming kind of hilarious. To make these crucibles to heat, to produce pure silicon into ingots. To produce the wafers for the microchips that are now so small. This was 1985 on the left, which is a 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter computer. And now it's 0.1 by 0.1. You can inject this computer into your body and it has a little antenna. So now the silicon chip, which is a complex circuitry of stone through which signals flow, signals which are in the silicon, not on the silicon. These signals are an extension of your brain, of our collective body, another kind of stone, but increasingly complex and increasingly invisible. Okay, what about architecture? I'm supposed to talk about architecture. Here's an architectural journal, Perspecta, 1967, the Yale School of Architecture. And the dean of the school at that time was Charles Moore. Charles Moore, always trying to hide. And in that particular year, he publishes an article which he compares a microchip circuit to Los Angeles, and he's very, very interested in the relationship between urbanism and the microchip, and he's very much agreeing with Marshall McLuhan and Buckminster Fuller that are arguing that we live inside electronics, that electronics is the architecture that we live in, but he does not agree that the architecture of electronics, this is why it's so funny, this not working of the electronics. He's convinced it does not look like Archigram's idea. In other words, an architecture of electronics would not look like electronics, and so he's interested in what it would look like. The same issue of Perspecta has an article by Marshall McLuhan called The Invisible Environment, which was originally given at a conference in 1965 with Buckminster Fuller. And Buckminster Fuller and Marshall McLuhan were always together on the idea that we live in the world of electronics and circuitry. And in fact, in 1967, it wouldn't surprise me if it's this translation that's causing the problem. In 1967, Marshall McLuhan publishes this little electronic circuit as his image of the new world that we live in. So the same year that Charles Moore is using an electronic microchip as his model for architecture, McLuhan is also using one and showing it on a finger. In fact, he took it from this advertisement, an RCA advertisement, which is all about the domestication of electronics. At the moment in which the microchip is becoming part of everyday life, McLuhan is using this image, which is an image of miniaturization and circuitry. And this is the circuit that Charles Moore was using, and this is the advertisement that he stole it from. In other words, there's a kind of visual culture in the 1960s, a visual culture of this new world of microchips, which are silicon. What you're looking at is silicon patterns. For example, in the same issue, you have this comparison of a piece of rice with a chip. Could you turn the translation off? Just turn it off. Great. So this is the cover of Scientific American, 1965, and you can see that the circuitry there's a kind of iconography of circuitry. This is the guy that invents that circuit. It's all about size or lack of size. Small, small, small. This is the drawing of the very first circuit. Maybe you can see why architects like these drawings. They are obviously architectural. They're described as architecture. I'm just trying to ask you to think of these as the beginning of a new kind of intestine. Imagine that in the 1959 with the first circuit, we found another way to expand and join ourselves together. And it's just an endless iconography of this circuitry. And it's becoming increasingly hard to see it. So just in the moment where it's disappearing, it's becoming too complicated to see. They start showing you up against the eye. This is the year of the famous publication of Moore's Law. And Moore's Law was all about the kind of accelerating in density and invisibility. I would suggest to you that he's writing this article exactly in the moment in which microchips are becoming impossible to visualize. So there is a new world, a new version of the human, a new electronic version that's becoming ever more small and ever more invisible. So there is a moment in the 60s where the human is becoming invisible, and there's a kind of a trauma about that, and there's a kind of a discourse about that, there's a kind of aesthetics about that, there's a kind of art form about that, there's a kind of negotiation about that. And that's what's going on in these images and in these calculations. Anyway, I think you get the point. They're getting more and more detailed. This is the first integrated circuit, integrated chip. So this is all the parts of a computer on one chip. It's becoming impossible to visualize. It's made in stone. So now you're looking at the silicon, you're looking at the etching. It's actually a photograph. It's a photographic etching. So now we have kind of complex photographs, a new kind of image that's made in stone, which is not just an image, but is a new kind of way of being, a new way of thinking, a new way of connecting. And these are becoming so small that they are on every object, in the air, on the ground, under the sea, in your body. It's a kind of aerosol of silicon, a kind of new kind of stone that's not sitting below you solid, but is just everywhere. Or to say it another way, you're inside this kind of aerosol of stone, which is nothing but architecture, architecture, architecture. If you think that architecture is, for example, the space in which species occupy, this is the space. Nothing could be more natural than this. This is now reaching the dimensions of DNA, slightly smaller than DNA. So I show you very quickly a section through the smallest size possible of this technology. So we are now smaller than DNA. So this is not just a kind of technological way of expanding our biology. It's not like biology using technology. This is technology which is biological, right, at its core. It's made in machines like this, in places like this. This is the big computer chip factory that's being built. It's huge superpower politics. This is Biden opening that factory. And just to finish, the connection between this ever more miniaturized world of microchips in which everything turns, even with Fortune magazine, 1961, they have a sense that this is a kind of urban argument, that this is a kind of an urbanism. And this is being thought about by Richard Meyer, not the same Richard Meyer, a different one, who's already thinking about the city, urbanism, as electronic. And he's thinking very seriously about it. And he's getting together with a think tank of other theorists to imagine the city of the future. And the city of the future looks like this, looks like a kind of biological, it's a single organism at the size of the planet. This is a project organized by Doxiadis in Greece, in which one of the main consultants was Richard Meyer. And they're even visualizing their project as a circuit. The computers being provided for this project are coming from the RAND Corporation, that at a certain point realized that software would be more important than anything else that they were doing. The first software company in the world is coming from the RAND Corporation, producing this kind of image that is probably inspired by this image, which is Marshall McLuhan, Medium as the Massage, the Aspen box, Quentin Fiore. So there is a kind of the moment in which it's impossible to visualize electronics is the moment in which electronics almost paradoxically will become a kind of icon. So you can have a kind of icon, a kind of image of the impossibility to imagine anymore, the impossibility to visualize. It's kind of like the sublime. It's a kind of like something bigger than bigger. So the smallness of it becomes almost like something big, right? And it's in architecture too, right? So 1970 project for imagining that the subway system in Montreal could be an educational system. So there's a relationship between the super small, here's the ant, and the super large. Like the capacity for electronics to get unbelievably small is the same as the capacity for a kind of transcalar expansion of architecture. You see it, for example, I'll give you just one example to finish. Super Studio, Super Surface, 1969, 70, 71. This is from the movie of Super Studio on Super Surface. They use the same iconography. So this is really not what the computer was in that moment. This is the last visualization possible of the computer before it became impossibly complex. Uses an image for the possibility of compressing all computational power into a little module, and this module can provide you with food. So again, it confirms that it's kind of intestinal, food, information, energy, water, everything is available, and they are dispersed across the planet in a kind of a grid. And because there is this grid, this endless surface of information, access, nutrition, ideas, you can then wander nomadically in a kind of space beyond time, beyond labor, beyond restraint, beyond the family, beyond politics and so on. So there is, let's say, in architecture 1970-71, a really, really clear image of how we now live inside a world made possible by silicon circuitry and silica signals that is so radical and so hardcore and takes as one of its opening kind of arguments the end or disappearance of architecture. So the moment in which we fully live inside electronics is the moment in which architecture is normally considered comes to an end. But since I've been trying to suggest to you that architecture is nothing but intestines, this idea that architecture ends when it gets kind of hyper expanded into this extraordinary kind of new kind of Stone Age architecture of silicon chips and so on, is of course not the loss of architecture, but the kind of radicalization or expansion of it. Anyway, it's too late. I'm too cold. It has been a technological miracle. It's been nice talking with you. I'm just inviting you to consider the possibility that when you eat now, who's doing the eating, right? It's not sort of you, the sort of intelligent, sentient human. It's you, a weird kind of transitional artifact produced by an incredible trans-species collaboration of ancient bacteria that are allowing you to think that you are independent of them, allowing you to act like they don't exist, and act like you don't care, even for you to participate in a tradition, a discipline, architecture that hates bacteria. In other words, a kind of a self-hatred. And isn't architecture nothing other than a very sophisticated attempt to hide bacteria? Like, isn't it what architects are really good at doing, is like hiding things? We never like to think that our buildings are leaking, creaking, smelling, moving, but they are, right? Architects are always called in, not because we need them for comfort or structure or stability. Architects are called in to hide the fact that buildings are alive, right? And this kind of ability to hide, this kind of professional skill to take the social embarrassment about bacteria, smells, and liquidity seems like not a good professional skill in a moment in time in which a kind of affection for bacteria might be the only possibility for the survival of the species, right? So if architecture is sort of interested in any way in caring for the human species, firstly, the way you care about the human species is to care for the bacteria that the human species hates, which are nevertheless the very reason for the human's existence in the first place. Probably that's why we humans hate bacteria so much, is we know that we would be nothing without them. And nothing is more contemptible than something that you can't survive without, right? It's like man and woman, right? Nothing more disastrous than the very thing that made you possible, right? So there may be a need for a new kind of architecture or anti-architecture which embraces the strangeness, the ever unbelievable strangeness of bacteria. And this sort of excuse for a lecture was just an attempt to maybe wake up that little thought in your mind that it's absolutely not you that's going to a nice bar in Barcelona to eat, but your bacteria, or the bacteria that are using you temporarily, are needing a little bit of to have some fun, to have some action with some other bacteria, and you get to pretend that you are somewhat separate from them, but you are not. And all that I'm trying to add to that tonight is just to consider the possibility that that very same logic applies to the world of electronics, which are also smelly, also shitty, also viral, also deadly, also very, very dangerous, and also very, very confusing. Anyway, it's enough.